The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of Ironclad, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
We cut through the partisan talking points. We're not interested in perpetuating fear. We're interested in seeking truth, hearing what's really going on America's borderland. Welcome to Borderland, an Ironclad original. This is going to be a little bit different than what you're used to. We just recently had the first presidential debate, and I think, like all of you, I sat and watched it in hopes of hearing personally some of the debate on the immigration crisis. We did get a few questions asked. We didn't get the answers I think we were looking for, and there were some controversial comments that were made throughout the debate that I hope to help clarify some of that today. And what I'm trying to do is hopefully educate and also inform. And so we're going to go over a few of the questions that were asked, and then I'll give you my views on it, what the answer is based on some of the either statistics or information that I currently know. So here we go.
Let's turn now to the issue of immigration and border security. President Biden, a record number of migrants have illegally crossed the southern border on your watch, overwhelming border states and overburdening cities such as New York and Chicago, and in some cases causing real safety and security concerns. Given that, why should voters trust you to solve this crisis?
Because we worked very hard to get a bipartisan agreement that not only changed all of that, it made sure that we are in a situation where you had no circumstance where they could come across the border with the number of border police there are now. We significantly increased the number of asylum officers. By the way, the Border Patrol endorsed my position. In addition to that, we found ourselves in a situation where when he was president, he was separating babies from their mothers, putting them in cages, making sure the families were separated. That's not the right way to go. What I've done since I've changed the law, what's happened? I've changed it in a way that now you're in a situation where there are 40% fewer people coming across the border illegally. It's better than when he left office. And I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either. Look, we had the safest border in the history of our country. The border, all he had to do was leave it. All he had to do was leave it. He decided to open up our border, open up our country to people that are from prisons, people that are from mental institutions, insane asylum, terrorists. We have the largest number of terrorists coming into our country right now, all terrorists, all over the world, not just in South America, all over the world. They come from the Middle East, everywhere. All over the world, they're pouring in. And this guy just left it open. And he didn't need legislation because I didn't have legislation. I said, close the border. We had the safest border in history. In that final couple of months of my presidency, we had, according to Border Patrol, who is great, and by the way, who endorsed me for president, but I won't say that, but they endorsed me for president. Brandon, just speak to him. But look, we had the safest border in history. Now we have the worst border in history. There's never been anything like it. And people are dying all over the place.
Here's the reality of a few points that I think you guys need to take into consideration. Okay. The Border Patrol itself is a apolitical organization comprised of 19,000 uniform agents. The Border Patrol has a labor union, National Border Patrol Council, okay, the NBPC. The Border Patrol itself, the agency does not endorse a president, any president, but it serves under the president, right, in the executive branch. And so understanding that, there at no time does the Border Patrol itself as the organization can endorse a president. They work under the executive branch, okay? But the Border Patrol union can make a statement, and they did. The viral tweet that was heard around the world that they do not endorse President Biden. And so during the debate, this became kind of a viral thing that was happening. And so there's a little bit of discrepancy in understanding that. So the Border Patrol itself does not take a political position, left or right. The Border Patrol union can make any statement that they choose, and they did on their Twitter, stating that they do not endorse President Biden. that is very separate, that's extremely different from the idea that the Border Patrol endorses the president or does not endorse the president. So just wanted to make sure we made that clear. There's more to that in a sense, like the Border Patrol agents' career field and frustrations of what's happening in this country, but that becomes more of an opinion. And so we'll just keep it at the facts. When we're talking about during the Trump administration, the separation of children, it was used as kind of a political gotcha during the Trump administration to counter what he did, and it made his administration and choices look really bad. But the initial intent of that was to slow down the traffic at the border, and currently we don't have a system kind of in place to house the massive influx of immigration. So that all came into place, and so even further so, a lot of people were blaming the Border Patrol on that incident. But if you understand the difference between Border Patrol, ICE, and Customs, then you'll better understand on how that works and who in which organization was in the position of housing, and the decisions on how they house them was based on what was available to them, based on what is set up in the event of massive influx. And so it doesn't look good putting kids in these holding facilities that look similar to cage, but what it was holding facilities that were temporary while the massive influx of immigration was happening, and also trying to determine who was the blood relative of these children. So what happens on the borders, and very common, is that families will pay traffickers to help their kids get across under the age of 18. Some of those are a version that is human trafficking. Some of those are a legitimate attempt at crossing the border illegally by using the means of what they can, using a coyote. And so the Border Patrol had a policy where they had to separate until they can determine who was the legal blood relative of the individual. And so that became scrutinized heavily in the media. And obviously the Biden administration uses that to try and make the Trump administration look bad. And that's kind of part of the game. So here's something interesting that my team of producers, we put together, because I think it's important that we give you the best information possible so you understand it. But the policy of separating children was in place to separate the children traveling alone. So like right now we have a huge uptick of children under the age of 18 traveling alone. And I'm talking young. Some of them are young. Some are 17, 16, 15, right? But some are 8, 7, 6, 5. And so that policy was put into place to really hopefully mitigate that a little bit. But the policy of children separation was in place to separate children traveling alone from the groups of adults apprehended with them, if those children were not traveling with their parents. And so that's a discrepancy that most people didn't understand moving forward. If you were a child at that time and you were traveling with your family members, you were not separated. The whole separation of children was because it was the standard operating procedure at the time. What was happening was very prevalent, that the smuggling organizations were transporting a lot of children. Like I said, some families were sending their kids, and some was just part of the exploitation of juveniles. And so this was put in place to try and help mitigate that. And the optics of it on the media looked terrible. So that's where we have a lot of discrepancies. So the Border Patrol itself does not implement any kind of tactics that are not approved by executive orders or federal law. Okay. So the Border Patrol cannot act on a whim. It can't act on its own accord. It has to follow the executive orders and policies that are put into place. And so, like I've mentioned in my book before, the sheriff who works in the town does not make the speed limit. They just enforce the speed limit. It's no different than a Border Patrol agent who's working a job. They just follow the orders that are given to them by the executive, by executive order or policies that are implemented. Okay. Understanding that goes up a chain of command. So when you guys were seeing kids in cages, those were almost always ICE detention or ICE holding facilities. And there is no excuse for how harsh that might have looked, but our government didn't have a situation, wasn't prepared for a situation of what it faced. And so you start to see this, what you see on the news, or these whistleblowers who are showing pictures, but giving very little context of it. One of the things that Trump was mentioning was the change of the policies that Biden, I'll go back and say, he decided to open the borders, was a reference to the fact that the Biden administration, when coming into office, they stopped the Remain in Mexico policy, which limited the amount of countries that could seek asylum, as well as stayed in Mexico, remain in Mexico policy, which means that until they're actually deemed a legitimate asylum case, then us as America can receive them and put them through the process, which, if you guys have watched the podcast, some of the asylum seekers are currently waiting sometimes 5 to 7 years. And so it's definitely a system that is kind of bombarded at the moment. And the mention of the Biden administration saying hire more asylum officers would be absolutely correct. It's something that would help the scenario, would help the situation, as well as immigration judges. We need more immigration judges who qualify to be hired or to be approved as an immigration judge. And so those two things would allow us to speed up the process of the asylum cases. I'll mention something that you see that, most people are nervous about closing the borders. It's not fair. It's unjust. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean closing the borders doesn't mean we're not going to accept asylum cases moving forward. It just means having a little bit more control on who we allow in at the time and identifying who comes across that country illegally or into our country illegally. I think there's a misconception to one side who believes that when you say closed borders, no one's allowed into the country. I think I mentioned before, last year we allowed 1.5 million migrants to come into this country legally. And so there still is an immigration process. It does take a while, but there is an immigration process that's in place. That's not to include all the asylum cases that, they're approving moving forward. And so there's just a misconception that closing the border means no one's allowed in this country and no one's allowed a fair shake in trying to get in. And that's absolutely wrong. When they say close the border, they're really just saying create a system that allows us to identify each individual coming into this country illegally and being able to kind of decipher who gets deported and who has nefarious, intentions. And so I think that's what the concern is. And I think all Americans would agree that we should be able to kind of decipher who are coming here to just work and gain opportunity in America and who is here to do harm to us. And so very complicated and complex topic, I know. Here's something that's interesting, okay? Currently right now, what is in place is that without the Remain in Mexico policy, we have a massive influx of individuals coming over to the country, seeking asylum, claiming asylum. Now, normally in the stay in Mexico policy, a lot of countries weren't allowed to be a part of that process because they determine who at the time could actually seek asylum. So if there's a country that is going through, political struggle or economic struggle, there's certain countries that they allow to seek asylum, but not all countries. And so right now what we have is every individual who's coming from other countries that we can't determine has a criminal background or criminal history will be allowed to seek asylum. And so that's where we have a huge influx of immigration, something that not everyone agrees with, to be allowed everyone the opportunity. Continuing, Trump said that he had the safest border in the history of our country. I don't know if that's factual in the sense you can say safest border, but he definitely slowed the progression of illegal immigration. Safest, I'd have to look at the analytics to that and to verify that to confirm it. But when he was in office, the border was in a better position than it is now, based on the policies he's implemented, the relationships he built with Mexico, the policies that he put into the stay in Mexico policy, as well as the deportations that were set in order. And so a lot of little things he did do, not the wall. Like everyone wants to jump to the obvious, like build the wall. That turned into more of a political narrative. It turned into like the big shiny penny that everyone paid attention to. But in all realistic, if you look realistically at the policy that was put into place, it definitely was conducive to securing our border in the safest way possible, and still having, he still had empathetic views towards migrants who wanting to come into America and seek opportunity. Again, like I said, the public media version of it was hysterical about the kids in cages, about the wall. But the foundation of the policies, were actually doing really good things for the border, really good things for the policies. And it wasn't, I'll just say it doesn't feel, I guess I feel like the media spinned it to try and make Trump look bad. But I think when you looked at it from the position of the boots on the ground, the agents, Department of Homeland Security, I feel like they were in a position where they were able to do their job and secure our border and keep our country safe in the best way possible. So I believe they had more support then than they do now. We'll say it that way. You have to understand, this is so complicated and complex that I'm really being careful about how I explain it, because I don't want to turn off people to this conversation. I actually want people to be more educated, more understanding on why it is the way it is. And when immediately some people hear the word Trump and they shut off, and the other side immediately hear the word Biden, they shut off. And I'm here sitting in a position thinking, like, is our country safe? And is our country still allowing people to gain opportunity and gain what this is, the beauty of America, right? The freedoms that we have. And so I personally believe in immigration. I believe we need immigrants in this country, right? There's jobs that are not desirable by most of us. I don't want to work in the sun. I don't want to do some of the migrant work that's been known out there, from agricultural work to many other things. But there's people out there who will, and not even that. There's intelligent, talented people from other countries that deserve the opportunity to come share those talents with us in America, whether it comes to science, education, sports, whatever it is. And so I'm not opposed to having a fair immigration policy that allows people to seek the opportunities of America. And so I think that's what all of us would like to see, a fair and just immigration system that still allows us to secure our country and make sure that men and women with nefarious intentions don't come into this country and aim to do bad things on our soil. So, when Trump says things like, in the quote, it goes, open up our country to people who are from prisons, people who are mental institutions and insane asylums and terrorists. When Trump says it that way, it doesn't feel good for immigrants to hear, or those who are trying to come into this country and do well. And so if you want to look at the statistics, right, statistically, the majority of the individuals who come to this country illegally have the intention of doing work that most of us would never want to do, like I mentioned earlier. They're usually coming here for different reasons: poverty, war, lack of economic opportunities. The list goes on and on. And for them to come to the American dream, the land of opportunity, is why they're willing to risk everything for it. Okay, that does not mean that every single person that comes across illegally is a terrorist, is a, again, wants to do harm to this great nation, or is from a Salem asylum or from a prison. That is used, again, as a fear-mongering tactic. And I just personally, I want you guys to know, like, truthfully, the majority of those who come across illegally are genuinely coming here to try and just gain an opportunity, food, safety, protection. the freedoms that they see in TV and everything else that you hear about America. And so now that does not cancel the validity that individuals who are coming through this country can be terrorists. There's definitely proof that terrorist organizations and terrorist individuals, people on terrorist watch lists have gained entry into America through our southern borders. That doesn't discredit the fact that a lot of the cartel is using this as a means and way of transporting drugs. And so both can exist. And so I just think it's unfair to mention one and not the other. If you want to have a fair dialogue, we should also mention that there's a majority of people here or coming here or attempting to cross into our country that mean to do well in this country as well. And then there's those who want to just come here, collect the money, and go back to their country and live a good life. And so that doesn't necessarily hurt our country, but it doesn't help by putting more money towards towards our economic position as a nation. But like I said, those two options are way better than the third of people coming to this country just to try and raise hell and cause havoc.
So we're so excited to launch this new piece for the Navy SEAL Foundation. We're titling it I Am. This piece plays out all the aspects that go unseen inside of the life of a team guy, the life of a family member. Everything we do for the foundation, we want it to do justice to the cause and for the community. So we want authenticity and we want it to make a difference. So we hope you get that from this. We're so excited to launch it.
Moving on to the next question.
President Trump, staying on the topic of immigration, you've said that you're going to carry out, quote, the largest domestic deportation operation in American history, unquote. Does that mean that you will deport every undocumented immigrant in America, including those who have jobs, including those whose spouses are citizens, and including those who have lived here for decades? And if so, how will you do it?
Just 1 second. He said we killed 3 people. The people we killed are al-Baghdadi and Soleimani, the 2 greatest terrorists, biggest terrorists anywhere in the world, and it had a huge impact on everything, not just border, on everything. He's the one that killed people with the bad water, including hundreds of thousands of people dying, and also killing our citizens when they come in. We are living right now in a rat's nest. They're killing our people in New York, in California, in every state in the union, because we don't have borders anymore. Every state is now a border. And because of his ridiculous, insane, and very stupid policies, people are coming in and they're killing our citizens at a level that we've never seen. We call it migrant crime. I call it Biden migrant crime. They're killing our citizens at a level that we've never seen before. And you're reading it like these 3 incredible young girls over the last few days. One of them, I just spoke to the mother, and they just had the funeral for this girl, 12 years old. This is horrible what's taken place. What's taken place in our country, we're literally an uncivilized country now. He doesn't want it to be. He just doesn't know. He opened the borders. Nobody's ever seen anything like. And we have to get a lot of these people out, or we have to get them out fast, because they're going to destroy our country. Just take a look at where they're living. They're living in luxury hotels in New York City and other places. Our veterans are on the street. They're dying because he doesn't care about our veterans. He doesn't care. He doesn't like the military at all, and he doesn't care about our veterans. Nobody been worse. I had the highest approval rating for veterans taking care of the VA. He has the worst. He's gotten rid of all the things that I approved, choice that I got through Congress, all of the different things I approved, they abandoned. We had by far the highest, and now it's down in less than half because he's done all these great things that we did. And I think he did it just because I approved it, which is crazy. But he has killed so many people at our border by allowing all of these people to come in.
Trump did not immediately nor directly answer the question, but instead he turned to the conversation about the high levels of violence that's been, you guys have seen on the news. There's a lot of highlighting illegal immigrants entering this country and then causing harm to an American citizen. So it's become kind of a focal point on a lot of the news channels of, 2 immigrants raped and killed this individual, that individual. And it does not go, that does not go past me easily. There's a very scary and sad and something that obviously, because of the massive influx of immigration, can definitely connect the dot. And the 2 individuals that were part of this specific case that Trump mentioned. He mentioned the Jocelyn girl from Texas that was, I believe, murdered by two individuals who were here illegally, if I remember correctly, Venezuela. If I was, forgive me if I mentioned the wrong country on that. But a very sad story. It's something that just, it's got to aggravate anyone to hear that any 12-year-old gets murdered and sexually assaulted. But what we have today is more people are using the illegal immigrant, I guess, umbrella to validate their arguments of the massive influx of immigration and how it's coming to America. It's coming to a city near you, and it's going to affect your country directly, or it's going to affect your family directly. I'm not saying yes or no. I'm saying we tend to ignore that there is hundreds of rapes and murders that happen all the time in this country, and they currently don't get the same attention as if someone was an illegal immigrant. And so, to be fair on the conversation, anyone who is raped or murdered in this country, it is a freaking terrible, terrible situation. Now, because of the massive position that people are taking because of the political argument, right? This politicized conversation, it's used in a way to kind of stir the pot, aggravate, and make Americans more furious about the subject, which in turn hopefully gains a voter on the direction that their agenda is leaning. So it pisses me off to hear these stories that happen. And yeah, if it was me, if it was my family, I would probably be just as angry and say close the border and be angry towards this certain individual, because that's what happens when you get frustrated and angry with something. But if we can take a step back and then research how many people are getting murdered and killed in this country weekly, monthly, and identify how many of those are from the illegal immigrant demographic, I think we're just highlighting the subject because currently we're in a big argument as a country on this topic. And so it's highlighted a little bit more than usual. Again, I say that, but I completely understand where the anger comes from, and just understanding that we can look at the statistics, and statistically, before this year or last year, is the statistics were proving that most immigrants coming from other countries caused the least amount of crime in America. And just recently, the Venezuelan conversation is interesting. We had a whole podcast on this that talked about the Venezuelan gangs that are coming into America. That almost validates the Trump administration's argument. And so, like I said, this is complicated. This is complex, but I sit back and think, we're highlighting a lot of illegal immigrants creating crime, but we're ignoring the fact that Americans killing Americans more often than ever. And so I think it's only fair to mention that. The Biden administration on that question did not respond to the question about mass deportations. Personally, the only way to slow down the immigration situation is to identify the countries that we believe deserve to seek asylum, and having some kind of streamlined process that we don't have currently, obviously. And streamlining means we'd have to probably hire a lot more individuals in the asylum space. But to include, we have to have repercussions for those who come into this country illegally with no means of seeking asylum, or else we are not creating, I guess, a stance that it is illegal to cross, our borders outside of a port of entry, and their attempts to escape and evade detection raises a concern. And so we definitely would have to change some things in our policies to create a border that is safer. And when you say secure, when people say they want a secure border, I don't know if people really can understand what that means. Does a secure border mean nobody gets across? Because that will never happen. does a secure border mean that, there's justifiable numbers? Yes, because in all realistic conversation, there will always be individuals who evade detection and come into this country illegally, whether through tunnels, whether through flying, whether through many different means. And so when we talk about this conversation, we have to just admit that a secure border and what we define as a secure border, and do we all agree on what that secure border definition means? Because that's another reason why we argue so much about this topic. The mass deportation comment that Trump gave, if you look at what ICE currently deports, they do not go out of their way to find individuals just deport. All right. They are looking for those individuals who are proven to been a part of certain crimes, domestic violence, many others. And so here, let me read some of these notes right here. It says, while mass deportation would highly be unlikely to the scale of the cost, right? Because it would just be so expensive. It's not entirely likely that we would find everyone in this country who is illegal and just deport them. And the truth of the matter is, everyone who is here seeking asylum cannot be deported because they're still waiting for the immigration process to take place for them to determine their case. And so they in itself, if they're seeking asylum, they're safe from deportation unless they have broken the law at some point, some capacity. So if they've, while here seeking asylum, whatever that law might be, it'd have to be a more justifiable. It can't be just like a jaywalking ticket, but something to the fact of aggravated assault. Okay, that then at that point they would be removed from that status and then potentially deported, case by case scenario. But that's the realistic of it, the realistic conversation of that. Let's jump to this question. The topic of inflation was brought up by the moderators as a current challenge.
And he caused the inflation. He's blaming inflation, and he's right. It's been very bad. He caused the inflation, and it's killing black families and Hispanic families and just about everybody. It's killing people. They can't buy groceries anymore. They can't. You look at the cost of food where it's doubled and tripled and quadrupled. They can't live. They're not living anymore. He caused this inflation. I gave him a country with essentially no inflation. It was perfect. It was so good. All he had to do is leave it alone. He destroyed it with his Green New scam and all this money that's being thrown out the window. He caused inflation. As sure as you're sitting there, the fact is that his big kill on the black people is the millions of people that he's allowed to come in through the border. They're taking black jobs now, and it could be 18, it could be 19, and even 20 million people. They're taking black jobs, and they're taking Hispanic jobs, and you haven't seen it yet, but you're going to see something that's going to be the worst in our history.
Thank you. President Biden?
There was no inflation when I became president. You know why? The economy was flat on its back. 15% unemployment. He decimated the economy, absolutely decimated the economy. That's why there was no inflation at the time. There were no jobs. We provided thousands of millions of jobs for individuals who are in all communities, including minority communities. We made sure that they have health insurance. We have covered, the ACA has increased. I made sure that they're $8,000 per person in a family to get written off for health care. But this guy wants to eliminate that. They tried 50 times. He wants to get rid of the ACA again, and they're going to try again if they win.
Here's the response that we can talk about on this. So I think we mentioned earlier, when people talk about taking jobs from U.S. citizens, there's a truth to that. It is like, yes, if there is a job in America and an American citizen can have it and an illegal immigrant gets that job, well, then, yes, now you're in competition with illegal immigrants that come into this country and fighting that job. But the other side of that conversation is, like I said earlier, how many of those jobs are actually favorable or that American citizens would even do? Okay. There's a lot of jobs in the agricultural space that I know for a fact most American citizens are not willing to do. And so, yes, reality is that if that is a position open for an American citizen and an illegal immigrant gets it, then yes, we are competing for that job. But realistically, I don't think anyone's really competing for those jobs because they're unfavorable. They're hard jobs, and most of us are not willing to do that. And so when you have that conversation, there's the truth to it, but then there's the reality. And I'll lean on that a little bit more. So, the negative impacts for the economy, there's several key factors that we can focus on. So Trump blames the influx of illegal immigrants, and he talks about the economy, and he also talks about taking jobs. Okay. So personally, like I mentioned before, I don't think that's as much the case as other things we can talk about, because if you're talking inflation, what I see is the government using our taxes for different resources for illegal immigration. And that's the direction that I would see it. Like I said, some of the jobs that these migrants or these illegal immigrants, we'll just keep using that term, are going for are not favorable to an American citizen. They don't want to do the migrant work, right? They don't want to do this agricultural work. Some of those guys are still getting paid. They're still getting taxed. They're not allowed to use some of the programs, right? The social programs that are out there. And so from the way I see it right now, there's nothing that is of major concern. But what is, and we had a podcast on this, and you guys get to see this in a few weeks, is the money that is put into these programs, the NGOs, billions and billions of dollars to help facilitate safety, helps facilitate movement, travel, housing for the illegal immigrants. Okay. There's a question later on that we'll get into. Yeah, I missed this question, but when you talk about these NGOs are, it's our tax money that is then turned around being used to support illegal immigration, in a sense, by housing, food, medical expenses, so on and so forth. That's where I see the massive influx of money that turns around, that we print to use to support, and then where inflation might have an impact. That's how I see it, because there's the podcast that we did with the investigative journalist talked about the NGOs and how much money they make. I mean, just in the top 8 of them are in each one high millions, some billions. And those are the ones who are paying for some schools to house illegal immigration, some of the hotels that we see in part of the discussion in the argument, from medical attention to many other things. And so when you have the massive influx of immigration, then you have a lot of the backlash that happens from that: housing, food, medical, that who's going to pay for that? And then our administration puts that money into NGOs that go and support it. That's a lot of money that is used in support to, I guess, safeguard the situation and illegal immigration. And so it's almost the back door of supporting illegal immigration by protecting housing, food, like I said, mentioned. So, and I know for a fact, we've seen the numbers on that. That's billions and billions and billions of dollars to support illegal immigration. So I think that was missed on this debate, where no one talked about was that's where a lot of the money was going. A lot of the money is going into these NGOs who are in support. If you guys are not watching it, I just air quotes. Just threw an air quote out there for you. So next question.
Let's discuss an epidemic impacting millions of Americans that both of you have made a top priority in your first term, the opioid crisis. And for both of you, the number of overdose deaths in this country has gone up. Under your term, it went up. Under your term, it has gone up. Former President Trump, despite the efforts that both of you have made, more than 100,000 Americans are dying from overdoses every year, primarily from fentanyl and other opioids. What will you do to help Americans right now in the throes of addiction who are struggling to get the treatment they need?
Jake, we were doing very well at addiction until the COVID came along. We had the 2.5, almost 3 years of like nobody's ever had before, any country, in every way. And then we had to get tough. And it was the drugs pouring across the border were it started to increase. We got great equipment. We bought the certain dog that's the most incredible thing that you've ever seen, the way they can spot it. We did a lot, and we were getting very low numbers, very, very low numbers. Then he came along. The numbers, have you seen the numbers now? It's not only the 18 million people that I believe is even low, because the gotaways, they don't even talk about gotaways. But the numbers of the amount of drugs and human trafficking in women coming across our border, the worst thing I've ever seen, at numbers that nobody's ever seen under him because the border's so bad. But the number of drugs coming across our border now is the largest we've ever had by far.
President Trump, thank you. President Biden?
Fentanyl and the byproducts of fentanyl went down for a while. And I wanted to make sure we use the machinery that can detect fentanyl, these big machines that roll over everything that comes across the border. And it costs a lot of money. That was part of this deal we put together, this bipartisan deal. More fentanyl machines, more be able to detect drugs, more numbers of agents, more numbers of all the people at the border. And when we had that deal done, he called his Republican colleagues and said, don't do it. It's going to hurt me politically. No, he never argued it's not a good bill. It's a really good bill. We need those machines. We need those machines. And we're coming down very hard in every country in Asia in terms of precursors for fentanyl. And Mexico is working with us to make sure they don't have the technology to be able to put it together. That's what we have to do. We need those machines.
Which is interesting because there's been several investigative journalists that have proven, we've even we've interviewed a few of them on this show, that China directly connected with the cartel in offering and selling them precursors to fentanyl so they can make it directly in Mexico. And so that is a fact that has been proven several times now. And so we can't ignore that statement. The current statistics show that the drug seizures continue to be a major portion of the CBP's work, right? So a big portion of drugs that are captured and apprehended by CBP, Customs and Border Protection, most of that is going to be at the port of entries. They're using X-ray technology, right? They're using dogs and other means of identifying anomalies in vehicles and whatnot in body carriers. And so there's a lot of drugs that are being apprehended and interdicted on our borders. But that's what we have the numbers for. You can't, there is no number for all of it because we're just telling you the 100% of what we catch. And so we have to remember that when they say the Border Patrol or the CBP has caught 70% of what we know, 70% of the 100 that we actually have accounted for. But we have no idea how much is actually getting across because we have no way of knowing that. We have no way of identifying how much is getting through tunnels, how much is flying in, how much is getting transported by other means. And so you as the listener and the viewer who listen to these numbers and data points, I want you to have the open-minded enough or be open-minded enough to understand that this is just the numbers of what we know. This number could be extremely low from the facts and the realities, okay? We do know over 100,000 a year are dying from fentanyl, and it's getting worse. And so when Biden mentioned that the fentanyl numbers were down, that doesn't necessarily correlate with the statistics that we have. While China and other nations contribute greatly to smuggling and precursor chemicals, Mexican drug cartels have invested in chemicals called super labs, right? They're creating their own meth, their own liquid, solid, and they're starting to use those. So they're able to produce their own meth and sell those or transport those into America by any means necessary. And so just recently, I saw a post online where they caught 100 pounds of methamphetamines at the border. And so this is proven facts. You guys should go check out this. The Border Patrol and Customs, they have really good social media pages, and they post a lot of their stuff. You guys should go check them out. They really do a good job in kind of helping you see what's happening day in and day out in their sectors. We obviously know a lot of the issues that are coming are from the Mexican side of the Mexican-American border. There's arguments that, people want to discuss about how much is apprehended, how much is not. And we'll never really fully understand the cartels are obviously making their money. They're obviously have a successful organization, whether it be through its commodities, right? Whether it be through drugs, whether it be through people, whether it be through services, whatever that may be. But they're continuing to have a lot of success and be financially secure in what they do. And they'll continue to do that, right? And until we can get a stronghold and partnership with Mexico to try and combat that, well, then we'll continue to see a problem like this. You know, in one of our podcasts, there was a lot of backlash on Luis Chaparro's message by saying that the cartel is excited about if Trump was in office, and people didn't understand, like, it wasn't about what your opinion is on that. It is what the cartel believes to gain more money. When you make it harder to enter America, they can jump their prices. And so it's no different that we have to find a way to get a good foothold of what's happening on the Mexican side of things so that it doesn't spill in over to America. That's really it. You know, I wish they talked a lot more about the immigration conversation. I think it's such a challenging topic to address, even in the presidential campaign, debate. But hopefully the next one, there is better dialogue and discourse on what they plan to do. It seemed as if Biden was kind of avoiding the massive influx of immigration during the whole time, and Trump was leaning heavy into it. I think he wanted to get into that discussion, but it never happened. I think both sides, have their arguments and are trying to lean more on what is gonna make them look better. But the immigration conversation is, at a national scale. Everyone's listening to it finally, and I'm really excited to see that, because we have a lot of work to do on our borders. It's a very interesting time. And all of you that are listening and watching today, I hope that we were able to kind of give you a little bit of insight on this. I wasn't trying to pick sides or anything. I really wanted to kind of give you both sides of the argument, what they said and what they didn't, and the truth of what the statistics look like. But I think when, I don't care where you lean, that we all want to have a country where our kids can feel safe. And that is one of the most important things in my family. And so I hope that all of you are thinking about that and thinking about protecting your families at all time. I know I am, but as well as what are the policies that are put into place to do that? And that's always a concern of mine, is what are we doing to protect our nation, and what are we doing to keep this nation free? Meaning allowing immigration to happen, allowing legal immigration, and making that a more streamlined process for those intelligent, for those hardworking, for those incredible families that are out there that want to come to this great nation and continue to be fruitful. And so there's a balance there that has to be had, and it's not an easy one. So I really appreciate you guys' time. Please, if you have any questions, if you have any gripes, complaints, hit me up, message the page, however you guys want to. We're just trying to give you a platform that talks about this subject in a way that isn't shoving any narrative down your throat, but trying to give answers and information. So thank you for your time.